He had billions in the bank, power in every boardroom, and a wedding ring waiting on his fiancée's finger. Yet on a quiet evening at a hotel restaurant, a simple note from a waitress shook his entire world, and revealed a truth money could never buy. What would you do if one small act turned your life upside down? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. The room was silent. Not the polished silence of a corporate boardroom, but the heavy, suffocating kind, like everyone was holding their breath at once. At the center of it all sat Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire CEO everyone admired from afar yet feared up close. His jaw was tense, his fingers tapping the mahogany table in sharp, impatient beats. For months, his empire had been crumbling under the weight of secrets, betrayal, and a pride he refused to lay down. Around him sat board members and investors, their expensive suits hiding the panic beneath. They didn't understand. They couldn't. He had explained his vision 100 times, yet every word seemed to vanish into the air, leaving confusion in its place. But then, from the back of the room, a quiet voice cut through the tension. It wasn't a board member. It wasn't a lawyer. It wasn't even one of his closest allies. It was Naomi Brooks, the waitress who had been serving coffee and pouring water all evening. Clutching a folded note in her trembling hand, she stepped forward. The note wasn't business jargon. It wasn't a financial plan. It was simple, raw, and human. Ethan's eyes locked on hers. For the first time, the mask of the untouchable CEO cracked. And when Naomi spoke, it was as if the entire room shifted. Her words weren't for the board, they were for him. Words that reached past his billion-dollar empire and cut straight into the hollow space inside his chest. "Mr. Caldwell," she said softly, "you don't need to speak to be understood. You just need to let yourself be seen." Gasps rippled across the room. Victor Haynes, the board member who had schemed for Ethan's downfall, froze in disbelief. Clara Jennings, the fiancée who had only loved Ethan's status, shifted uncomfortably, realizing her place in his world was slipping away. But Ethan was undone. The man who had everything, the fortune, the fame, the power, realized in that moment that what he craved most wasn't another victory in business. It was connection. It was love. It was the courage to finally stop hiding behind numbers and strategies. And Naomi, the woman who had once been invisible to the world, had become the mirror that showed him his true self. He stood, his voice breaking for the first time in years. "Naomi. I finally understand." The board watched, stunned, as the billionaire CEO, known for his ruthless control, reached for the hand of the waitress who had dared to give him a note. This wasn't just the end of a meeting. It was the beginning of a love story no one in that room would ever forget. The banquet hall smelled faintly of roasted herbs, polished silver, and the expensive cologne of men who had more wealth than imagination. Crystal glasses clinked softly in the background, but no one was truly paying attention to the dinner. All eyes were fixed on Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire CEO at the head of the table. He had just outlined a bold new strategy for his company, a plan no one in the room seemed to understand. Investors shifted uncomfortably, exchanging skeptical looks. Victor Haynes, his longtime rival within the board, smirked, clearly enjoying the sight of Ethan losing his grip. The silence that followed his presentation was crushing. But then, something entirely unexpected happened. A hand reached over his shoulder. Small, steady, but trembling at the fingertips. Naomi Brooks, the waitress who had been quietly serving water, placed a folded piece of paper next to his plate. She didn't bow her head or hurry away like most staff would. She simply set it down and stood still for a moment, her dark eyes meeting Ethan's with a quiet urgency. Ethan blinked, stunned. Nobody ever dared approach him this way, least of all a waitress. With a reluctant hand, he opened the note. 4 words stared back at him, written in neat, determined handwriting. "You're speaking, not connecting." Ethan's breath caught. He read it again, slower this time. His chest tightened, not from anger, but from recognition. The words stung because they were true. He wasn't connecting. He hadn't connected with anyone in years, not the board, not his fiancée Clara Jennings, not even himself. His life had been a fortress of strategies and numbers, carefully keeping the world at arm's length. The entire table watched curiously. Victor leaned forward, eyes narrowing, ready to weaponize whatever was happening. Clara shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her carefully painted smile fading. Ethan looked up at Naomi. "What did you say?" His voice was low, almost a whisper. Naomi hesitated, but then, she found her courage. "I said," she repeated softly, "you're speaking, not connecting. They don't understand you because you're not letting them feel you." Gasps rippled across the table. A waitress daring to interrupt a billionaire's speech? Unthinkable. But Ethan didn't explode. He didn't dismiss her. Instead, he froze. And in that stillness, the carefully constructed mask of the CEO began to crack. For the first time in years, Ethan Caldwell wasn't the man in control. He was just a man who realized he had been chasing victories without voices, numbers without names, love without warmth. The silence stretched long and uncomfortable, but Naomi didn't back down. She held his gaze, her chin tilted slightly higher, though her hands trembled at her sides. Victor scoffed, breaking the tension. "Mr. Caldwell, are we really taking notes from the waitstaff now? Perhaps she'd like to sit on the board." His mocking laughter filled the air. But Ethan didn't laugh. He didn't even look at Victor. He kept his eyes locked on Naomi, as if she was the only person in the room who mattered. Finally, Ethan spoke. His voice was softer now, stripped of arrogance. "She's right." The words landed like a bomb. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Clara's eyes widened in disbelief. Victor's smirk collapsed. But Naomi. Naomi's lips parted slightly, shocked that he had listened at all. Ethan stood, slowly buttoning his suit jacket. He looked around the table, his gaze sweeping over every skeptical face. Then he returned to Naomi. "Would you," he asked quietly, "tell me how to connect?" The room erupted in whispers. The billionaire CEO was asking advice, from a waitress. Naomi swallowed hard. She hadn't meant to speak up, let alone to spark this moment. But something in Ethan's eyes, something raw, unguarded, compelled her. "You have the knowledge," she said carefully, her voice steady now, "but they need to know your heart. Don't tell them what this plan means for numbers. Tell them what it means for people. For lives. For futures. Speak like a man, not just a CEO." Ethan's chest tightened again. Her words weren't business advice, they were life advice. He realized in that instant that everything he had been missing, humility, connection, love, was standing right in front of him, wearing a simple waitress uniform. He turned back to the board. "Naomi is right. I've been so focused on winning that I forgot why I started. This isn't just about money. It's about building something that matters, for people, for families, for tomorrow. If you can't feel that, then I've failed you as a leader." The room fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't hostile silence. It was reverence. Naomi lowered her gaze, cheeks flushed, and stepped back. She hadn't meant to become the center of attention, but the ripple of her words had changed the entire atmosphere. And in that moment, Ethan Caldwell knew, everything had just shifted. His empire, his future, his heart. The billionaire CEO had finally been seen. And the woman who had given him a note had unknowingly become the most important voice in his life. The conference hall had never felt heavier. Even after the boardroom murmur subsided and the clatter of silverware resumed, there was no disguising the shift that had just taken place. A waitress, someone invisible to their world, had interrupted the billionaire CEO and left an imprint none of them could ignore. But the echo of her words, "You're speaking, not connecting," didn't just linger in the air. It haunted Ethan Caldwell's chest like an unsettled storm. He sat in silence, hands clasped tightly, while his fiancée Clara Jennings leaned toward him with a forced smile. "Darling," she whispered, her voice like velvet stretched thin, "you don't actually mean to entertain her, do you? You're making a spectacle of yourself." Ethan's jaw flexed. "Clara, please." His tone was sharper than he intended. Across the table, Victor Haynes pounced on the opening. "I agree with Clara," he said, his smirk widening. "We cannot allow casual staff to dictate the tone of this company. If this is leadership, then perhaps it's time we question who's truly fit to lead." The board shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Ethan and Victor. The power play was obvious. Ethan's pride screamed to fight back, to bury Naomi's words under logic and authority. Yet a quieter voice inside, one he rarely listened to, kept replaying her sentence. "They don't feel you." He straightened his tie, pretending calm. "This meeting is over for tonight. We'll revisit in the morning." The executives rose reluctantly. Victor's smirk was victorious, Clara's silence was icy, but Naomi? Naomi kept her head low, quietly gathering plates as if nothing had happened. Yet Ethan could feel her presence, like a pulse, steady and unshakable. Back in his hotel suite, Ethan loosened his tie and dropped into the leather chair by the window. City lights blinked outside, distant and indifferent. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, but even the burn down his throat couldn't drown the turmoil in his chest. He replayed the moment in his mind, the folded note, Naomi's voice, the audacity of her honesty. He was furious, but not at her. He was furious at himself. Because she was right. His phone buzzed. A message from Clara. "We need to talk. This embarrassment tonight cannot happen again." Ethan tossed the phone aside. For once, Clara's opinion didn't matter. But why did Naomi's? Why did the words of a woman he barely knew weigh more than the council of executives he had worked with for years? He set the glass down and ran both hands over his face. Resistance clawed at him. Pride whispered, "You're the CEO. She's just a waitress. Forget it." But humility, strange, foreign humility, whispered back, "She saw you when no one else did." Meanwhile, in the service corridor below, Naomi Brooks leaned against the wall, her apron still tied, her hands trembling. She couldn't believe what she'd done. She had slipped that note almost without thinking, a reckless act born of frustration. But when Ethan actually listened, that was the shock. Her fellow servers whispered around her. "Naomi, are you insane?" one muttered. "You're going to get fired," another warned. Naomi smiled weakly. "Maybe. But, didn't you see? He heard me." Still, her chest tightened with dread. She needed this job. Her mother's medication, the rent, they depended on her paycheck. She couldn't afford to be bold. And yet, something about the way Ethan looked at her made her believe she had done the right thing. But belief doesn't pay bills. She sighed, pulling off her apron, whispering to herself, "Lord, let this not be the mistake that ruins us." The next morning, the boardroom felt colder than usual. Tension clung to the polished mahogany table. Ethan walked in, his usual confidence carefully stitched into his suit, though inside, his thoughts were unraveling. Victor cleared his throat the moment Ethan Saturday, "I trust you've had time to reconsider last night's interruption." Clara, seated beside him, added, "Yes, Ethan. We can't let theatrics undermine your credibility." Every word pushed him back toward pride, back toward dismissing what Naomi had said. Resistance coiled tight in his chest. But then his eyes caught movement. Outside the glass walls of the boardroom, Naomi carried a tray of coffee for another meeting. Her steps were quiet, her head slightly bowed, but her presence ignited something inside him. Ethan turned back to the board. He inhaled, steady. "No," he said firmly. I haven't reconsidered. In fact, I believe last night was the first honest moment we've had in months." Gasps echoed. Victor's smirk faltered. Clara's eyes blazed. Ethan's voice grew stronger. "This company isn't built on numbers alone. It's built on people, people like the ones who serve us, who depend on us, who trust us. If we can't connect with them, we don't deserve their trust." The room froze. Naomi, outside, had stopped walking. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but his words carried, and they landed deep in her chest. Ethan felt the resistance break. The pride still burned, yes, but it no longer owned him. For the first time in years, he felt something shift, not just in his company, but in himself. The next morning, the atmosphere at the Grandwood Hotel shifted. The conference buzzed with nervous energy. Investors whispered in corners, board members exchanged sharp looks, and staff carried trays like soldiers in the middle of a battlefield. Ethan Caldwell arrived, suit pressed, expression unreadable. But inside, he wasn't steady. Naomi's note from the night before replayed in his mind, her daring words, her fearless eyes. A waitress had seen through him when the very men on his board could not. He thought he'd bury it, brush it off as a fleeting embarrassment. But fate had other plans. "Mr. Caldwell," the hotel manager hurried toward him. "There's a scheduling issue. Our conference staff is short this morning. One of the only people cleared for both catering and admin support is Naomi Brooks. She's been reassigned to assist you directly throughout today's sessions." Ethan froze. "Assist me?" "Yes, sir. Sit-ins, notes, refreshments. Essentially, your aide for the day." The billionaire CEO glanced past the manager, and there she was. Naomi, carrying a tray of coffee, her posture straight despite the murmurs around her. Their eyes met for the briefest second. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She just waited. And in that moment, Ethan Caldwell, the man who commanded empires, realized he had no choice. The morning session unfolded, but it was impossible to ignore Naomi. She sat 2 chairs away, quietly taking notes. Her pen tapped against the paper when Victor Haynes droned on about profit margins. Her brows furrowed when numbers didn't align. She whispered sharp reminders whenever Ethan almost overlooked a detail. At one point, she leaned closer. "You're about to approve something that will bury your smaller partners. Do you really want that on record?" Her words slid into his ear like a blade. Ethan stiffened. "You presume much for someone carrying a notepad." Naomi didn't back down. "Maybe. But I presume less than the man who thinks silence equals agreement." The room fell into a tense quiet. Even Victor smirked, sensing weakness. But Ethan, surprisingly, didn't lash out. He simply adjusted his tie and said, "Noted." Inside, though, he battled himself. Why am I letting her get to me? Why can't I just shut her out? By midday, forced proximity turned into something undeniable. Lunch was served in a private room. Naomi, assigned to remain, brought his plate. When she set it down, Ethan finally spoke directly. "Tell me, Naomi. Do you always write notes to CEOs during board meetings, or was last night special?" Naomi tilted her head. "Only when CEOs forget that people matter more than numbers." Her honesty cut deep, and for the first time, Ethan almost smiled. Almost. The day stretched on. Every break, every document, every whispered aside, Naomi was there. And the strangest thing happened, Ethan found himself listening. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. In one heated debate, Victor slammed his folder shut. "This is ridiculous. Caldwell, you've gone soft. Taking business advice from a waitress. Do you realize how this looks?" The words hung in the air. Naomi froze, pen mid-stroke. Ethan looked at her, then back at Victor. Sometimes, he said slowly, the clearest truths come from people who aren't blinded by profit. If that bothers you, Victor, perhaps you're in the wrong room. Gasps rippled through the table. Victor's jaw clenched. Naomi blinked, surprised. And for the first time since she met him, Ethan Caldwell defended her. Later, in a quieter corner of the hotel, Naomi found herself standing beside him as staff reset the conference room. The hum of machines filled the silence. She folded her arms, guarded. "Why are you letting me get this close, Mr. Caldwell?" she asked softly. Ethan exhaled, staring at the city skyline through the tall glass. "Because, maybe I'm realizing you're the only one who's not trying to take something from me." Naomi studied him, searching for cracks in the armor. "Or maybe," she said, "you're just lonely." The words hung heavy. He didn't deny it. If you were in Naomi's shoes, suddenly pulled close to someone powerful, someone who rarely listens, would you speak boldly like she did, or stay silent to protect your job? Drop your thoughts in the comments. But as the sun dipped, the forced proximity began to spark something more dangerous than tension, connection. Ethan found himself noticing details, the way Naomi tucked her hair behind her ear when she thought, the calm fire in her voice when she challenged him, the quiet resilience in her posture. Naomi, on the other hand, felt conflicted. This was the man she had judged as cold, untouchable. Yet here he was, listening, respecting, almost human. She couldn't afford to let feelings grow, but her heart was already slipping. And fate wasn't finished forcing them together. That evening, just as Naomi prepared to leave, a sudden storm flooded the city. Roads closed, transport delayed. The hotel announced emergency accommodations for essential staff, Naomi included. The manager delivered the news with an awkward smile. "You'll be staying here tonight, in the executive wing. Closest rooms available are, well, next to Mr. Caldwell's suite." Naomi's eyes widened. Ethan's lips parted in disbelief. And just like that, forced proximity wasn't just for the day. It would stretch into the night. Two people. Two worlds. Now one hallway apart. The stage was set. The storm raged outside, winds howling against the tall windows of the Grandwood Hotel. Lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating the polished marble floors of the executive wing. The storm had trapped them both, Ethan Caldwell in his suite, Naomi Brooks in the one just across the hall. But fate rarely allows walls, even gilded ones, to keep hearts apart. Naomi stood by her window, arms folded tight. She'd never spent a night in such luxury. Crystal lamps, velvet chairs, a bed like a cloud. But all she felt was restlessness. She kept thinking about the man across the hall, the billionaire CEO who, hours earlier, had defended her in front of powerful men. She told herself it meant nothing. Yet her heart refused to listen. Ethan, meanwhile, sat alone in his suite. His tie loosened, jacket discarded. For once, he didn't bury himself in spreadsheets or financial forecasts. Instead, his thoughts circled Naomi. The bold waitress who dared to speak when others bowed. The woman who saw through him, challenged him, unsettled him. And then, a knock. Naomi's voice, soft but steady. "Mr. Caldwell, the hotel manager asked me to check if you're settled. They're worried about the storm cutting power." Ethan opened the door. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, the billionaire and the waitress, two storms colliding. "You don't have to call me, Mr. Caldwell," he said quietly. "It's Ethan." Naomi hesitated. Then, "Are you settled, Ethan?" The name tasted strange on her tongue, but it carried a weight that made him pause. She stepped inside, and what began as a practical check quickly shifted into something deeper. The storm flickered the lights, and instinctively, Naomi moved closer to the window. "Storms used to terrify me as a kid," she admitted. "When the thunder came, my mom would light candles and tell me stories. Said the noise was just heaven clapping." Ethan found himself asking, and now? Do storms still scare you? Naomi glanced at him, her expression soft. Not the storms outside. Just the ones life throws at you when you least expect. The words lingered. For the first time, Ethan's chest tightened with something unfamiliar, empathy. It was his turn. He rarely shared, but tonight, the armor cracked. You know, Ethan began, voice low, people think success means peace. But the higher I climbed, the lonelier it became. Every smile around me has a price. Every handshake hides an agenda. Sometimes I wonder if anyone sees me. Naomi studied him, and for the first time, she didn't see the billionaire CEO. She saw the man, tired, human, haunted. You're wrong about one thing, she whispered. I saw you. That's why I gave you the note. Ethan swallowed hard. What if I told you, no one's words have stayed with me the way yours have? The air thickened. Two hearts on opposite ends of power and class suddenly stood on the same ground. But vulnerability isn't easy. Naomi looked down, torn between compassion and self-protection. I shouldn't even be here, she said. You're my boss's client. A billionaire CEO. And me? I'm just a waitress who couldn't finish business school because my mom got sick. My life is tables and trays. Yours is boardrooms and empires. We don't belong in the same sentence. Ethan's jaw tightened, his voice breaking slightly. Don't ever call yourself just. The room listened to you when they ignored me. You have more clarity than half the people on my payroll. Her eyes flicked up, startled. You mean that? I've never meant anything more. Silence stretched, the storm outside echoing the storm inside them both. Finally, Naomi laughed softly, almost bitterly. You know what's funny? I used to dream about sitting in those meetings. I studied business strategy until I could quote case studies in my sleep. But dreams don't pay hospital bills. So here I am, pouring coffee for the very world I thought I'd join. Ethan leaned closer, his voice warm now. And yet, when you spoke, everyone listened. Dreams don't die, Naomi. Sometimes they just wait for the right moment. Her breath caught. For the first time in years, someone believed in her. What's more powerful to you, Naomi's courage to speak truth despite her position, or Ethan's willingness to finally listen? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. The conversation deepened, stretching beyond storms and boardrooms. They spoke of childhood, of sacrifices, of victories and scars. Ethan told her about Samuel Pierce, the mentor who once warned him, if you build a kingdom without love, you'll die a king in an empty castle. Naomi confessed her guilt over watching her mother struggle while she worked long shifts. Each confession was a brick removed from the walls they'd built. Each truth was a crack in the armor. And yet, the closer they drew, the more dangerous it became. Because Naomi knew this connection could ruin her if she wasn't careful. And Ethan, engaged to Clara Jennings, felt the pull of betrayal tightening around his conscience. Still, when the lights finally flickered out, plunging the suite into candlelight, neither moved away. Ethan's voice, rough with something unspoken, broke the silence. Naomi, what happens if the person who finally makes you feel alive is the one you're not supposed to want? Naomi's heart pounded. She wanted to run, but her feet stayed rooted. She wanted to deny the truth, but her eyes betrayed her. Then, she whispered, you have a choice to make. And in that charged moment, with thunder rolling across the sky and the candle flame trembling between them, Ethan realized, he was already making it. The city lights glimmered against the night sky, but for Ethan Caldwell, the world felt darker than ever. Hours earlier, he had walked out of the boardroom, a room that once crowned him king of innovation. He left behind the smirks of Victor, the cold stares of investors, and the ultimatum of Clara Jennings. But none of that mattered. Because Naomi Brooks had run out of that room, and Ethan couldn't shake the image of her trembling hands, the sound of the glass shattering, or the pain in her voice when she whispered into that phone. Her mother. Something was wrong. Ethan's driver asked if they should head back to the penthouse, but Ethan's answer was firm. No. Find Naomi. Take me to her. At the small community hospital across town, Naomi sat hunched over a plastic chair in the waiting room. Her apron was still stained from spilled water. Her hands trembled as she pressed them together in silent prayer. Her mother, Lorraine Brooks, lay behind those doors, her heart struggling against years of sacrifice and weariness. Naomi's eyes burned. She had always been strong for others. Tonight, she felt like a child again. And then, she heard footsteps. When she looked up, she froze. Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire CEO, the man whose world was skyscrapers and boardrooms, stood in this dimly lit hospital waiting room. He wasn't in control here. He wasn't powerful here. He looked almost human. Naomi, his voice was low, uncertain. I had to come. She blinked, her throat tightening. Why? This isn't your world. You should be with your fiancé. With your company. Ethan shook his head. For the first time in his life, he spoke without rehearsing, without defending, without hiding. No company. No fiancé. Not tonight. I'm here because you matter. Because when you left, I realized everything I've been chasing is empty without someone real to share it with. Naomi stared at him, caught between disbelief and a flicker of hope. Before she could respond, a doctor stepped out. Family of Lorraine Brooks? Naomi jumped to her feet. Yes. I'm her daughter. The doctor smiled gently. She's stable for now. She needs rest and careful monitoring, but she'll pull through. Naomi's knees nearly buckled in relief. Tears streamed down her face. She whispered a thank you, then felt Ethan's hand, warm and steady, catching hers before she fell. For the first time, she didn't pull away. Days later, the hospital room was quiet except for the beeping of monitors. Lorraine Brooks, pale but smiling, motioned Ethan closer. So, this is the man who followed my daughter here, she said, her voice thin but firm. Ethan smiled faintly, uncharacteristically shy. Yes, ma'am. I know I don't deserve her time. But I want to try. Lorraine studied him for a long moment. Then she said something that pierced deeper than any boardroom critique. Money can build empires. But only love can build a home. Don't hurt my daughter, Mr. Caldwell. She's had enough battles. Ethan nodded. I don't want to hurt her. I want to fight for her. With her. Naomi looked away, her heart pounding. She wasn't ready to fall, but her walls were cracking. Meanwhile, Victor Haynes tried to seize control of the company. But without Ethan's steady hand, the cracks showed. Investors didn't trust Victor's greed. Media outlets whispered about betrayal. And quietly, Samuel Pierce, Ethan's old mentor, spoke to the press. Ethan Caldwell may have stepped away, but he's not finished. He's learning what leadership truly means. The public began to shift. Investors grew restless, not against Ethan, but for him. And slowly, the tide turned. Ethan received a call one night while sitting at Naomi's side in the hospital cafeteria. The board wanted him back. But this time, on his terms. And for the first time in his life, Ethan didn't rush to say yes. He looked at Naomi. Her eyes tired but strong. Her mother sleeping upstairs. And he asked himself, what's the point of winning the world, if I lose her? The answer came weeks later, at a charity event Ethan hosted, not a flashy gala in a glass tower, but a fundraiser for struggling families, held at the very hotel where he first met Naomi. Reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Victor was nowhere to be found. Clara Jennings had vanished from his life like a shadow at dawn. Ethan stepped onto the stage, Naomi standing just behind him. His voice carried not arrogance, but conviction. For years, I thought success was about being untouchable. But the truth? Success means being connected. To people. To love. To purpose. I lost myself chasing perfection. But a simple note from someone who saw through me, gave me my life back. He turned, eyes finding Naomi's. She froze, breath caught. And in front of everyone, Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire CEO, reached for her hand. Naomi Brooks. You've shown me what matters. And I don't just want you by my side. I need you. Not as a waitress. Not as an employee. But as the woman I love. The crowd erupted. Naomi's heart raced. For a moment, she remembered every reason to say no. The differences between their worlds. The risk of being hurt. But then she remembered his hand holding hers in the hospital. His words to her mother. His choice to leave the boardroom behind. And she whispered, tears shining in her eyes. Yes, Ethan. Yes. The room exploded in applause. Cameras flashed brighter than ever. But in that moment, neither of them saw the lights, the crowd, or the wealth surrounding them. They saw only each other. And so, the story that began with a billionaire CEO ordering a meal, ended with a man discovering love, humility, and redemption in the most unexpected place. Because sometimes, the waitress holding the tray isn't just serving water. Sometimes, she's serving truth. And truth will always set you free. The room seemed quieter than before, though nothing had really changed. Conversation still hummed in the background, glasses still clinked, and the lights still glowed over the elegant conference hall. But for Ethan Caldwell, something inside him had shifted forever. He wasn't just a billionaire CEO anymore. He wasn't the untouchable figure at the head of a table filled with ambitious men who measured worth in numbers, mergers, and acquisitions. He was simply a man. A man who had been lost for far too long. A man who, in the middle of pride and pressure, had been found by the voice of someone no one had expected to matter. Naomi Brooks. He glanced at her again, across the room. She wasn't dressed in power suits or glittering gowns. She wasn't framed by flashing cameras or luxury. She wore a simple waitress uniform, her hair tucked back, her eyes still holding the courage that had shaken an empire. And yet, she looked like the most powerful person in that room. Because she had given him something no one else dared offer, the truth. Victor Haynes' face was still a mask of frustration, his schemes unraveling before his eyes. Clara Jennings, Ethan's fiancée, shifted uncomfortably in her chair, realizing for the first time that her carefully staged engagement had been nothing more than a hollow transaction. The board members murmured to one another, confused by the sudden turn of events. But Ethan didn't hear them anymore. What he heard was Naomi's voice, firm yet vulnerable, carrying words that had stripped away his defenses. What he felt was the paper note in his pocket, a note that had started it all. A few handwritten lines, but with the weight of destiny. You've forgotten what matters. Don't let pride destroy what you were meant to build. Simple. Honest. Brave. It was the kind of message that changes not just a moment, but a life. For years, Ethan had been running at full speed, chasing bigger deals, faster growth, higher profits. And in that pursuit, he had forgotten himself. Forgotten people. Forgotten love. But now, as he looked at Naomi, something became clear. Love had found him in the most unexpected place. Not in the arms of a perfectly polished fiancé. Not in the applause of greedy board members. Not in the headlines that crowned him as one of the most powerful men in the world. Love had found him in humility. In courage. In the heart of a waitress who dared to speak truth to power. The weight of it all settled on Ethan, but instead of crushing him, it lifted him. For the first time in years, his chest felt lighter. He wasn't trapped in a cage of expectations anymore. He stood. The entire room fell silent, waiting for his next move. And though his voice carried the strength of a leader, there was something different in it now, something real. "Tonight," he said, "I learned that power without people is empty. Success without love is meaningless. And pride is the fastest way to lose yourself. But I refuse to lose myself any longer." His eyes landed on Naomi, and the smallest smile formed on his lips. A smile not of conquest, but of connection. Because for Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire CEO who had ordered a simple meal that evening, his richest investment had just begun. And this time, it wasn't in stocks, or companies, or deals. It was in love. It was in Naomi. It was in a future he never saw coming. The story doesn't end with numbers on a screen. It ends with two hearts learning to beat in rhythm, not for status, not for appearance, but for something lasting, something true. And maybe, just maybe, that's what wealth was always meant to be. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that love can be found in the most unexpected places, then I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe now to the Billionaire Enclave, where every story brings you powerful lessons about life, love, redemption, and the moments money can never buy. Don't just listen to stories, be part of a community that believes in second chances, in courage, and in love at last. Your next favorite story is waiting. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's take this journey together.